In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a glTF file that contains multiple material variants. This ottoman here will be our end result. It contains 5 materials, which we can switch out and apply to the mesh whenever we want. This is much faster and more convenient than loading 5 different meshes with 1 material each. We will need certain software and tools, but they're all free and very accessible. I've linked some of the more specific ones in the video description. These tools are Blender 3.0, the Materials Variants plugin for Blender, GLB Packer, an online glTF conversion tool, Model Editor, an online 3D model viewer, Notepad++ or a similar code editing program. And finally, we need an image editing program that lets us control the quality of a JPEG image, such as Photoshop or GIMP. For this workflow, you're going to need Blender 3.0 and a specific version of the Materials Variants plugin, as this is the only combination that works reliably. Future versions might sync up again, but in my experience, this is the best combination for now. I've linked this legacy download page for Blender 3.0 in the video description, and I'm running Windows, so I'm going to download the Windows zip. I won't show you the installation process, as it's pretty straightforward. For the Materials Variants plugin, I'm going to navigate to the releases page on GitHub and download the source code zip for version 0.0.2. Just as a side note, if you already have a different version of Blender installed, it's totally possible for multiple versions to run together on your system. You can see that I have 2.93, 3.0 and 3.2 installed for different purposes. I'd recommend naming and grouping them like this in your start menu or desktop so you know exactly which version you're opening up each time. Now we're going to install the Materials Variants plugin. I'm going to click Edit, Preferences and look at the Add-ons tab. Typing glTF in the search bar will show all the glTF add-ons. Be sure that you have the Import-Export glTF 2.0 plugin enabled, then click Install and navigate to where you downloaded the Materials Variant zip. I already have it installed, so I won't install it again. After you install it, it should now show up in your plugins. And now if we add a mesh, we can see that the Variants Materials bar has appeared in the Object Properties. A quick note about shortcuts. You're going to see me importing and exporting glTF files really quickly using the Quick Favorites button. This is totally optional, but when I started handling lots of these files in bulk, I found that this shortcut saved me a lot of clicks and sped up my workflow. Just go to File, Import, glTF, and right-click it to add it to your Quick Favorites. You can do the same with the Export button, and now when you press Q, they'll appear by your cursor. Now we're going to create the ottoman I showed at the start of the video. This model requires only 1 material set, which simplifies our process a lot. If you're handling a mesh that contains multiple materials, you'll need to follow some extra steps, which I will show in the Adding Variants to a Mesh with Multiple Materials section of this video. I'm starting out with 5 GLB files, which are just color variations of the same base mesh. I'm going to copy the folder location and drag this window onto my second monitor for now. I've created a new default scene and I'm deleting the starting cube and camera. I'm going to import a glTF using my Quick Favorite shortcut, paste in the folder address I just copied, and import them all at once. Then I'm going to select them all and delete them. We delete the meshes, but all the material and texture information stays in the scene. I'm then going to re-import the first model alphabetically, which in this case is the charcoal ottoman. It's important that variants should always be set up in alphabetical order to ensure consistency between models. The model components can all still be selected individually, which isn't ideal, as we would need to apply the variant meshes to each component one by one. I'm going to join them into one single mesh by selecting everything with A and pressing Ctrl J to join. Now I'm going to go to Material Properties and we can see that all the materials from the different color models are stored here. I'm going to go through and rename the materials from the default so I can easily identify them by name. This is important as we might need to access the materials through code later, and having descriptive names is really helpful. If your materials are already well named, you can skip this step. Once you're done, be sure to reset the material to the one that came first in the list. In this case, this is charcoal. Now I'm going back to Object Properties and adding 5 varied material slots, 1 for each color. Going in alphabetical order, I name each variant and assign it the correct material. Then I export the GLB file and I save it in a new folder to reduce confusion with the old models. First I exported a GLB file, but I'm also going to change the export format and export as a glTF separate, which will split the file into its component textures and a couple of other files that we might need to access later. I'm going to drag the GLB into Model Editor so I can preview the variants. They've come out in the right order, which is good, and the GLB itself has a very reasonable file size. We try to aim under 10 megabytes for AR files, but around 5 megabytes is even better for simple models like these. If you create a variant model this way, but the variants are out of order or the file size is too big, that's no problem. I'll walk through solutions to these problems in a later section of the video. When working with a complex model that has multiple materials already applied, there are a couple of extra steps we need to take. I'm starting with a clean scene and deleting the default objects, then importing the first model in the list and selecting a single component. We can see in material properties that this model uses 3 materials. I'm going to rename them to Burgundy 1, Burgundy 2, and Burgundy 3 for easy identification later. Now I delete the mesh, knowing that the materials will stay in the scene, and I repeat the process for the other 4 colours. The reason I haven't imported everything at once like I did with the Ottoman is that the materials can be hard to keep track of if they aren't named straight away. We're going to have 15 materials in this scene instead of the Ottoman's 5. Once I rename the final material, I'm not going to delete the mesh. This model is going to become the basis for the variant model. Again, the mesh contains a lot of individual components, which should all need to have variants applied to them individually. Unlike the Ottoman, we can't just join everything together, because this mesh contains 3 different materials. Joining everything into one piece would remove our ability to select where each material goes. To make this process as simple as possible, we're going to break this mesh down into sections based on which material has been applied to them. As there are 3 materials, we will end up with 3 sections. Remember to change the components back to their default materials. The sofa side panel I had selected while renaming the materials currently has C-Glass 3 applied, as that was the last material I renamed, when it actually should be C-Glass 1. I'm going to select a single component and temporarily change this material's subsurface value to 1, so that we can see all of the components it has been applied to. I'm also going to change the subsurface colour, as the white is hard to see on the pale blue. I'm shift selecting each of the components that change colour, pressing Ctrl J to join them, and then pressing G to move the mesh around and make sure I didn't miss anything. I then reset the subsurface value to 0, select a new component, and repeat the process for material 2. At the end, the mesh is split into 3 groups. With all my groups in place, I'm going to switch the materials back to the topmost alphabetically, which here is Burgundy, as we want it to be the first to show up when the final model loads. The C-Glass 1 region will now have Burgundy 1 applied, and so on. I select the region which has Burgundy 1 applied, and add the 5 variant slots as we did with the Ottoman. I give the slots the correct names in alphabetical order and apply the materials: Burgundy 1, Charcoal 1, Fog 1, etc. When that's done, I select the Material 2 region and repeat the process, and again for Material 3. I realised halfway through that I can type the material name in the Material field, which removes the need to scroll when I'm dealing with a long material list. Once all variants have been assigned, I select everything with A and export. I export a GLB, and then again as glTF separate. I drag the GLB into Model Editor as a test to be sure everything is correctly assigned. The variants are displaying correctly, but the file is very large at 33 megabytes. In this case, I would look at the textures we exported, sort by size, and use an image editor to compress the textures. It's important to find a balance between a usable file size and a texture that doesn't have too many compression artifacts. I like to compress every texture to under 300 kilobytes if I can, and ideally the final GLB will be under 10 megabytes. As long as the compressed textures are saved with the exact same file name as the original, there won't be any technical problems caused by editing the textures outside of Blender like this. I've just cut to a folder of compressed image textures that I created using this workflow. I'm going to select everything, including the bin and glTF files exported by Blender, and drag them into GLB Packer. The final file is around 13 megabytes, That's a pretty good trade-off for a complex model that contains 12 variants and 36 materials in all. Sometimes you will find PNG images in your texture export. It's usually safe to compress these into JPEGs as long as they are being used to create translucent effects in the model. Compress them with the same file name, so image1.png will become image1.jpg. Be sure to delete the old PNG file. You will need to make one small fix to the associated glTF file, as it will be expecting a PNG texture and won't automatically load the JPEG as a replacement. Right-click the glTF and open it in Notepad++. Press Ctrl F, click on the Replace tab, and replace PNG with JPEG in the file. You should now be able to drag your files into GLB Packer without any issues. Sometimes a variant model will export with its materials in the wrong order. This sofa and ottoman combination has said fine, the last material in the stack, move to the top of the stack. This is a very common issue and can easily be fixed in Notepad++. We right-click the glTF and open it in Notepad++. The glTF file looks intimidating, but there are only 3 parts of it that we need to be familiar with: the list of variants, the list of materials, and the section where materials are mapped to variants. First, we will correct the variant list. I'm going to cut find from the top of this list and paste it to the bottom. The rest of the list is correctly ordered alphabetically, so I'm going to leave them. It's very important to separate items in the list with commas. Turquoise is no longer the last item, so I will add a comma to separate it from vine. I will also remove the comma after vine, as it's the last item in the list. Incorrectly formatted code will cause errors when the files are dragged into GLB Packer. It will usually tell you the line of code that caused the error, which can help with fixing code problems. The variant names are not correct, but the vine material is still being mapped to the first list item, and the blush material is being mapped to the second, and so on. We can scroll down to find the material list, which displays the materials we named in Blender earlier. I like to open up a Google spreadsheet to take notes of the variant list and compare it to the materials list. It's important to remember that item lists start from position 0. I'm now scrolling the materials list in Notepad++ and comparing it to the list on the spreadsheet. There are 2 material sets in this model, the sofa and the footstool, so there's a second round of materials to make note of. Next is the section of the glTF file where materials get mapped to variants. Currently material 0, vine, is being mapped to variant 0, which is now blush. Vine's new position in the variant list is 11, so I will change the variant number to 11. I then repeat this process for every item on the list. The material value that comes after indices at the very end should be changed to the material that we want to display first. In our case, this is blush, or material 1, so no changes need to be made. We then repeat this process for the next section, which defines the mapping of the second material set. The second vine material at position 12 will also be mapped to variant 11, the second blush material at position 13 will be mapped to variant 0, and so on. Once again, we set the final material value to the second blush material, which is material 13. We then save the glTF, drag the files and textures to GLB Packer, and save out the GLB. If everything worked correctly, we should be able to view the new GLB in Model Viewer and check that the variants are in the correct order. Sometimes we need to combine 2 variant models. In this example, I am putting a sofa and an ottoman together to make a chase item. Both of these models have already been processed and have several variants attached. Normally the process is very simple. I import the sofa, then the ottoman, and arrange them as needed, ensuring that they're nicely centered in the scene. A problem might occur if they have a different amount of variance. Here, the ottoman has an extra chestnut material that the sofa doesn't have. In this case, I'll just delete the chestnut variant entry, select everything, and export as usual. The collective file size is fine, and when I check the glTF code, I find that the variant orders have bugged slightly and fine is once again first in the list. I correct this, drag the files into glbpacker, and check the final result in Model Editor.